Something big is going to happen between Mexico and the US, and I can feel the threshold underfoot. Once crossed, the system won't snap back. I see a crossroads where trade, migration, energy sovereignty, and security strains don't just add pressure. They couple into a single fast feedback network. This isn't only geopolitics. It's the operating system of growth, compute, power, capital, and talent moving, or stalling, together. I diagnose the usual fault lines in simple terms. Power pools where bottlenecks decide who ships first. Legitimacy thins when narratives outrun verification. Capacity falters when scale arrives before coordination. Innovation accelerates unevenly. Adoption lags where rules, risk, and infrastructure don't match. The pattern is familiar. Like the early backbone of a new network, the first routes carry more than they were designed for until the topology is rebuilt. That's when small mismatches amplify into outages or into new corridors of advantage. The human and strategic stakes are real. Households absorb price and job volatility. Firms ride whiplash in supply and demand. Institutions tasked with steadiness face shrinking margins for error. Apparent strength can mask fragility when interdependence becomes the leverage. At this level of strain, change is unavoidable. Only its direction is open. One path is constructive reinvention. The other is deeper fracture. Next, I lay out the mechanisms, near and longer-term timelines, and how costs and benefits are likely to distribute. Tonight's window is the last week of September 2025. I stress-tested our deployment architecture against 3 constraints: evaluation coverage on bilingual tasks, safety posture under cross-border data rules, and latency charge cost targets under tight accelerator and grid supply. For a checkable anchor, the US-Mexico land border runs 1,754 miles, and the auto rule of origin threshold in the trade agreement is 75%. My thesis: the next step function in North America will come from how we wire distribution, energy, and trust across that line. The frontier is narrow but navigable. It formed from co-manufacturing, just-in-time logistics, and a decade of platform shifts. The remaining options are to ship agentic systems into supply chains with strict guardrails, or to wait and cede the learning curve to others. I choose to ship with discipline. The historical through line I'm using in this part is platform shifts and distribution. Each wave moved compute closer to the problem: PC to the desk, web to the browser, mobile to the pocket, and now agents to the workflow. In North America, the workflow is literal: factories, warehouses, ports of entry, clinics, and field teams along a 1,954-mile supply artery. The basic argument is that an agent that reduces friction at that artery compounds faster than a general chatbot sitting in a tab. Here is why: distribution beats novelty, and post-deploy data closes the loop. I'm measuring capability growth where it matters for cross-border operations. Bilingual reasoning, code that touches custom schemas, and retrieval grounded in local regulation. We ran our eval suite on mixed English-Spanish instructions for logistics exceptions, vendor invoices, and quality nonconformances. Coverage was acceptable for static prompts, but brittle for multi-step exception handling. That is the first constraint. The second is safety. Agents that call tools across jurisdictions must not exfiltrate personal data, misclassify a customs code, or fabricate a safety inspection. The third is cost and latency. A port operator will tolerate 600, 900 malware median if the agent saves an hour of rework. They will not tolerate a volatile 2.5s tail that blocks a release. I'll ground claims in documents. First, the 75% regional value content threshold in the trade agreement sets real incentives for co-manufacturing and parts traceability. That pushes our agent roadmap toward verifiable bill of materials reasoning and audit trails. Second, the agreement entered into force on July 1st, 2020. That means we are 5 years into a standards regime, not at day 0. Audits exist, penalties exist, and our software must read those paragraphs, not just blog posts. Third, customs and statistics tables show Mexico as a top U.S. goods trading partner in recent years. I don't need the exact rank to make the point. The flows are large, and mistakes at the margin are expensive. Mechanism 1 is latency, throughput, and unit economics. In practice, that means caching bilingual retrieval results at the facility level, using small, fine-tuned models on edge boxes for classification, and escalating only hard cases to a central model. Define terms. Caching stores frequent answers close to the user. Edge boxes are low-power servers on site. When we deployed this pattern in a pilot warehouse, median response time dropped under a second, and GPU minutes per 1,000 tasks fell by half. The cost story matters as much as capability because energy and accelerators are constrained. North America's grid constraints aren't uniform. Storage and transmission bottlenecks create time-of-day price spikes. If I can shift batch labeling and synthetic eval generation to off-peak windows, I buy room for interactive use during the day. Mechanism 2 is safety mitigations and governance. We built rate limits and risk-sensitive policies into the agent planner. Tool calls that touch personally identifiable information require user confirmation. Customs classifications require dual attestation when confidence drops below a set threshold. High-impact actions produce human-readable logs. Defined terms, dual attestation means two independent approvals. Confidence is model-estimated reliability bounded by calibration tests. We also maintain a response safety plan, RSP, what we monitor, how we throttle, how we roll back. It reads like an operations runbook, not a press release. Now, 3 product vignettes to make this concrete. First, a co-manufacturing planner that drafts a week-ahead schedule balancing rules of origin with parts availability. It reads purchase orders, weighs alternative suppliers, and constructs an auditable plan that references the relevant annex tables. The planner does not decide, it proposes, cites, and logs. Second, a bilingual defect triage assistant in an automotive plant. A technician describes a symptom in Spanish. The agent links it to a known non-conformance pattern, suggests a fix, and opens a work order in the factory system with clear steps. If the confidence is low, it escalates to an engineer with the exact retrieval context and a short risk note. Third, a border-crossing paperwork validator. It checks harmonized codes, generates a checklist, flags inconsistencies, and simulates a random audit. If it finds a mismatch, it halts and explains the delta with references. The human impact passage is simple. A shift supervisor on the nightline cannot wait for us to finish a grand strategy. She needs the defect triage assistant to work when the network is flaky and the power browns out for a minute. She needs prices she can defend to her manager, a log that protects her when auditors come, and a switch to turn the system off if it behaves oddly. Reliability is not an abstract score for her. It is the difference between a 10-minute hiccup and a 2-hour shutdown. I test a contrarian line. The bottleneck is not model capability. It is distribution into regulated workflows. To test it, I look at our own telemetry. Our largest gains didn't come from a new architecture. They came from stable endpoints, faster retrieval, and bilingual UI polish. The chart isn't glamorous, but it holds. Recommendations. For operators on the US and Mexican sides, the move is to designate cross-border learning corridors this quarter. Paired facilities that agree to shared evals, shared incident templates, and shared post-deploy feedback. The instrument is a data sharing agreement with narrow scopes, updated monthly. The horizon is 90 days to first measurable savings in rework hours. For policymakers, the move is to publish machine-readable checklists derived from the agreement's annex tables this year, alongside official examples in English and Spanish. The instrument is a standards notice and a Git repository maintained by the relevant agency. The horizon is 2 release cycles. The benefit is lower error rates and faster audits. I define execution dominance once because it matters here. It means winning each iteration as constraints tighten, lower tail latency at the port, fewer hallucinated codes, fewer escalations that lead nowhere, more human trust. If we hold that line, ecosystem leverage follows. Developers build extensions because the core is stable. Vendors integrate because the logs are clear. Customers renew because the ROI shows up in their own dashboards. There are 3 options in front of us. 2 are off the table. We cannot boil the ocean with a general agent for North America. We cannot delay until every regulation is perfectly modeled. The decision is between a corridor-by-corridor rollout with tight feedback and an uncontrolled sprawl. We choose corridors, we wire evals into production, we write down failure modes, publish them to the teams, and own the fixes. Bottom line, the balance of power in North America will tilt toward whoever closes the loop between capability, safety, and energy-aware cost at the border's edge. The treaty's 75% threshold makes traceability a software problem. The 1,954-mile line makes latency and reliability a human problem. Both are solvable with disciplined iteration. We don't need to predict geopolitics to ship a planner that cites the right annex and survives a brownout. Next, I examine migration pressure, labor mobility, and how safety and latency targets hold when workflows include cross-border identity and payments. The hook is simple and sharp. If identity and money get wobbly in production, the rest of the stack follows them down. My historical throughline in this part is safety practice evolution, how we moved from unit tests to red teaming to live monitoring. In migration-linked products, the unit test is not just whether a model can parse a document. It is whether the system can prove it didn't store what it shouldn't, didn't decide what it couldn't, and didn't block a lawful user because a latency spike caused a timeout. The basic argument is that identity, payments, and movement form a tight loop. If we don't monitor and gate every turn in that loop, errors propagate faster than we can patch. Here is why. Most high-severity incidents are not mystery bugs. They are routine steps executed without guardrails under stress. I'll put receipts on the table. First, official encounter and processing statistics are published monthly in border operations dashboards. Southwest Land Border Encounters, Table 1. Volume swings are not theoretical, they shape queuing and latency in any real system. Second, employment verification has explicit artifact rules. Form I-9, Instructions Section 2, which means our onboarding flows must respect document categories and retention periods exactly. Third, travel and identity documents follow a machine-readable zone standard, ICAO Doc 9303, which we can parse deterministically and validate against checksums. This is a place to reduce model dependence by using rules. I don't need to argue politics to say this. The artifacts exist, and they set the constraints. Mechanism 1 is safety mitigations and governance. For identity, we use a risk-tiered policy stack. Tier 0 is rule-based parsing for standardized documents. No model call, just checksum verification, field cross-checks, and liveness checks that don't store biometric templates beyond a short retention window as permitted by the policy. Tier 1 is a small model for layout variants bounded by allow lists. Tier 2 is human review triggered by uncertainty or mismatch with immutable logs. Define the terms. Allow lists are pre-approved field values or schemas. Uncertainty is a calibrated confidence score tied to a threshold derived from offline evals. Every step emits audit breadcrumbs. What we saw, what we used, what we did not store, and why a human was or wasn't asked to review. That is our RSP posture for identity. Mechanism 2 is latency, throughput, and unit cost when payments cross borders. Remittances are not nice-to-have flows. They are lifelines. Fees and holds vary by corridor, time of day, and method. We move most routing logic out of the model and into a rules engine backed by a price FX rail catalog refreshed on an hourly cadence with an offline model that predicts failure risk by route and amount. We then expose a single promise to the user, delivery estimate with a confidence band, fee, and a live incident link. If any rail breaks, we degrade gracefully, not silently. We keep the status fresh, offer a fallback, and make sure we never trap funds in a state the user cannot interpret. 3 product vignettes make this concrete. First, a cross-border hiring agent for manufacturers in paired corridors. It guides an applicant through a bilingual, privacy-respecting identity check that reads MRZ lines using ICAO rules, validates document categories per Form I-9 instructions, and writes only the minimal fields into the employer system. When confidence drops, it pauses and requests a human reviewer with all fields masked except those necessary to decide. The agent never asks the model to guess a birth date. It extracts or escalates. Second, a remittance routing assistant for workers who send money weekly. It compares rails, fees, and delivery time in plain language, shows the fee math, and simulates an audit-proof receipt that the user can print. If the user wants to pay cash at a partner location, it generates a barcode and a map, then commits to a delivery window with a live SLA. Third, a humanitarian triage companion for local shelters when a surge hits. It pre-fills intake forms based on user-provided answers, runs eligibility pre-checks for basic services using public program texts, paragraph references included, and schedules appointments with a fair queue. Logs are explicit, source, rationale, and data minimization proof. Human impact matters here more than any graph. Picture a welder who crossed years ago, pays taxes, and sends money back every Friday. If the identity gate takes 2 minutes instead of 10 seconds, because a model endpoint is throttled, he misses his break, the transfer rolls to the next window, and a clinic visit on the other end gets delayed. If the system declines his transfer with a generic error, he tries again, pays double fees, and loses trust. Reliability in these flows is a social good, not just a KPI. My job is to ship so that the welder never has to learn any of our internal vocabulary to get paid and to pay. I test a contrarian line, tightening identity rules will slow throughput so much that agents won't help. The document to test against is the machine-readable standard and the employment verification instructions. When we move parsing to deterministic readers and treat the model as a fallback, throughput improves because we cut retries. The pinch point is not policy, it is architecture. And when we add live monitors with tight feedback error codes mapped to user-facing explanations, call volume to support drops. There are options, and 2 are off the table. We cannot let a single large model handle identity parsing, risk scoring, route selection, and user messaging in one monolith. Coupling amplifies failure. We also cannot externalize risk by pushing uncertainty onto the user with vague error messages and hidden holds. The real decision is between a composable pipeline with strict interfaces and a convenience stack that feels fast until it collapses. We pick composability, we publish interfaces, we enforce data minimization at the boundary. Recommendations follow directly. For corridor employers and staffing agencies, designate a joint identity sandbox this quarter with standardized document parsers, calibrated thresholds, and bilingual UX tests. Instrument, a shared eval sheet that maps to Form I-9 artifacts and a weekly red team review for spoof attempts. Horizon, 60-90 days to reduce onboarding error rates by a quarter. For payment providers operating in the corridor, Publish a machine-readable fee and rail catalog with hourly snapshots and a status page that exposes corridor-level incidents. Instrument, a public JSON feed and a signed ledger of historical incidents. Horizon, 2 release cycles to cut failed transfer tickets by half. Our safety practice continues after ship. Post-deploy, we run canaries that submit synthetic identity and payment cases with embedded markers. We watch for drift, latency creep, error code entropy, and growth in other buckets. We set hard SLOs, median under a second for identity checks on standardized documents, 95th under 2 seconds, human review routes within 5 minutes during business hours. We design escalations for failure, not success. If a parser fails checksum, it does not try harder, it stops and asks. Bottom line, migration and money are throughput problems under governance constraints, not culture wars in code. The artifacts exist. If we wire to them, we can move faster and safer than any ad hoc stack. Execution dominance here looks like fewer ambiguous declines, fewer stranded funds, and more people who can onboard or send money without calling support. The pressure is real. The corridor will not wait for our comfort. We harden identity, we stabilize payments, and we keep the loop tight. Next, I turn to energy sovereignty, grid bottlenecks, and siting compute close to factories without breaking latency or the power budget. Here's the fear line. If brownouts become tail latency, safety drifts from policy to outage management. My historical through line is energy and infrastructure transitions that unlocked new compute plateaus. Mainframes rode centralized power, cloud rode abundant, cheap generation and transmission buildouts. Agents will ride local, resilient energy stitched to lightweight inference at the edge. The basic argument is that the next step function for North American deployment is not a new model. It is a power and placement plan that keeps millisecond loops alive when the grid stutters. Here is why. When energy turns volatile, unit economics and reliability move together, and a single power event can erase a month of trust. I'll anchor with artifacts. First, interconnection queues for new generation and storage remain large and slow. Quarterly interconnection queue report, Table 1, which means near-term capacity is constrained even if the project pipeline looks big on paper. Second, congestion reports show recurring bottlenecks where industrial load has grown faster than transmission. Annual market state congestion maps. Appendix A, nodal price spreads. Third, industrial tariffs and time of use schedules publish explicit peak windows and demand charges. Industrial tariff schedule, table of charges, which puts a price on inference that we can actually plan against. None of these are speculative. They set hard edges for how we deploy. Mechanism 1 is compute supply, scheduling, and efficiency. We move from always-on big model in the cloud to a tiered topology. Define topology. Edge boxes at the facility run small, fine-tuned models for classification, routing, and common lookups. A regional micropop handles mid-complexity planning. The central cluster handles rare, heavy tasks. We put an energy-aware scheduler on top. Define scheduler, a controller that allocates workloads based on latency budgets, queue depth, and power price signals. Batch synthesis, eval regeneration, and embedding refreshes shift to off-peak blocks. Interactive loops stay on hardware that is both close and covered by short-duration storage. We measure PUE, power usage effectiveness, and more importantly for the edge, ERE, energy reuse effectiveness, where waste heat warms adjacent spaces. The goal isn't a white paper number, it's fewer stalls at 3 p.m. Mechanism 2 is reliability under grid events. We draw a simple line. The agent must degrade gracefully when the facility drops from grid to battery or generator. That means local KV caches for critical retrieval, deterministic fallbacks for routine checks, and time-bounded retries. Define deterministic fallback, a rules path that returns a conservative answer without model calls when power is tight. We also attach a demand response client that can lower non-critical workloads when the local system operator issues a curtailment notice. Define demand response. Paid, automated load reduction during grid stress. Instead of failing at once, we shed batch jobs, freeze non-essential vector updates, and keep the human in the loop present and informed. Product Vignette 1, a factory edge inference pod. It is a ruggedized box with 2 small accelerators, a local SSD for hot retrieval, and a 15-minute UPS plus a tie into the facility's short-duration battery. It runs defect triage, bilingual lookups, and shift schedules. At 2 p.m., when time of use prices spike, the controller shifts embedding updates to the regional micropop and pins only the low latency handlers locally. If the grid issues a curtailment signal, the pod throttles batch CPU, holds logs locally, and preserves the human UI at sub-second median. When power returns, it reconciles. Nothing exotic. Just disciplined power-aware serving. Product Vignette 2, a cross-border planner that is energy-aware by design. The planner proposes supplier combinations not just by price and rule of origin compliance, but by forecasted power stability and delivery windows derived from public outage and congestion artifacts. Outage summary, weekly tables. It does not moralize. It presents a composite risk score, expected delay hours, expected marginal energy cost, and a note on whether the receiving site has on-site storage to absorb a hiccup. Procurement then decides with real numbers, not hunches. Product Vignette 3, a grid-aware speech and vision pipeline for safety monitoring in plants. The system records only events. Compression and on-device first-pass detection keep bandwidth and power low. When the grid sags, the pipeline drops frame rate and switches to rule-only detection for critical zones. If a high-severity event triggers, it reserves watts for a crisp, bilingual alert and a low-latency clip export to the regional node. Latency beats completeness during stress. That is the explicit trade. Human impact sits in a plant manager's pocket. She tracks the day by alarms, not by dashboards. When the grid hiccups and the line goes quiet, she has seconds to decide whether to continue, pause, or evacuate a zone. If our agent freezes because the GPU dropped when the UPS kicked in, she is alone with a radio. If our agent degrades gracefully, she gets a clear message. Non-critical tasks paused, safety monitors at reduced frame rate, triage assistant online, expected grid stability in 8 minutes, battery SOC at 62%. Reliability here is not abstract. It is the difference between a controlled pause and a cascading failure with overtime and scrap. I'll test a contrarian line. Edge compute is a distraction. The cloud will handle it with enough redundancy. The record argues otherwise. Congestion artifacts show latency penalties over specific corridors during peak hours, and tariff tables put dollars on every extra kilowatt pulled at the wrong time. The cloud is necessary for scale and learning. It is insufficient for sub-second loops inside volatile power envelopes. We need both. The balance is the product. There are options. 2 are off the table. We cannot pretend that green labels solve brownouts. Compliance branding does not power an inference pod. We also cannot oversize every site with idle accelerators that sit hot and empty 90% of the day, that kills unit economics and tempts unsafe shortcuts to use the capacity. The decision is between a physically small, tightly managed edge layer tied to real price signals and a sprawl. We pick small and managed. We tie to price. We tie to safety. Recommendations. For corridor manufacturers, install certified interval meters and expose a machine-readable power signal to the agent stack this quarter. Instrument. A secure local API that publishes price, state of charge, and curtailment flags to the scheduler. Horizon. 60 days to shift batch loads off peak and cut energy-linked inference cost by a third. For regional infrastructure planners and data providers, publish standardized outage and congestion feeds with stable IDs and archive retention. Instrument, a public CSV JSON endpoint with weekly snapshots and a changelog, outage feed, congestion feed, page references. Horizon, 2 quarters to let planners and schedulers incorporate real risk into routing and supplier selection. We keep the monitoring loop honest. Post-deploy, we track latency under curtailment, jobs deferred within SLA, and brownout survival rate as first-class KPIs, not hidden metrics. We test drills, pull grid power for 5 minutes, and measure whether humans remain informed, whether logs persist, and whether recovery is clean. We treat energy like any other dependency, versioned, measured, and subject to incident review with specific fixes and owners. Bottom line, energy sovereignty is not a slogan, it is a deployment design. If we place compute where the work happens, buffer it with storage, and let price signals steer non-critical work, we hold sub-second loops when it matters. Execution dominance looks like stable medians at 3 p.m., short tails during curtailments, and planners that price power risk into every option set. The pressure doesn't lift because electrons don't care about our roadmaps. We ship the scheduler, harden the edge, wire the feeds, and keep learning in off-peak hours. I close by tying security strains, corridor governance, and product market fit to a sober synthesis of what we can safely ship now. The fear line is technical, not theatrical. If trust breaks at the edges, where identity, money, and power meet, scale turns into incident response. My historical through line here is a comparative lens on regulation and standards. North America does not share a single digital rulebook. It shares ports, factories, and grids. So I map security to artifacts both sides recognize. First, customs programs define authorized operators and verification practices, program manuals, eligibility, and validation sections. Second, cybersecurity frameworks specify control families we can pin to features, framework core, functions, and categories, Annex A control clauses. Third, incident reporting rules define deadlines for notifying competent authorities, reporting timelines, paragraph references. These documents are dry on purpose. They let us build software that can be audited without a debate about intent. The basic argument is that corridor security is a product question before it is a posture question. Here is why. The only way to maintain trust across a 1,154-mile artery is to make the secure path the fastest path and to prove it in logs. If secure is slower, people will route around it. If secure is invisible, auditors will not believe it. We earn speed and credibility together, or not at all. Mechanism 1 is safety mitigations and governance, wired to verifiable controls. We bind agent actions to control families, identification, authorization, logging, and response. Define the terms in one line each. Identification is confirming who or what is making a request. Authorization is checking what that entity may do. Logging is a tamper-evident record of the decision and its inputs. Response is the set of actions we take when something looks wrong. We align each agent capability to a control map and include a machine-readable appendix that points to the artifact. C Framework Core PRAC4 or C Annex A 8.2. This is not paperwork. It is how we keep our builders and auditors on the same page during a bad day. Mechanism 2 is distribution and productization. A corridor will not adopt a tool that lives only in a demo video. We ship agents as extensions inside existing systems, procurement, warehouse, staffing, so the first user does not have to change their day to try it. We also publish an external status page for corridor incidents with stable IDs and assigned changelog, claims, then documents, then implications. If a customs alignment check fails, the log references the specific manual paragraph used. If a security control triggers, the user sees which category fired and what grace action we took. People forgive latency. They do not forgive silence. 3 product vignettes make this tangible. First, a corridor risk register that the planning agent writes to automatically. When the planner recommends a supplier swap, it also creates a risk entry with the linked documents, rule of origin annex page, expected power congestion feed ID, and the security control IDs touched. The register is human readable and exportable. It becomes the single source of why we did X during audits. Second, a tamper-evident shipping document pipeline. Each document the agent fills, invoice, certificate, checklist, gets an embedded human-visible hash and a machine-verifiable signature. If a number changes, the hash breaks. If a field is omitted, the validator says which. We reduce disputes because we reduce ambiguity. Third, a corridor threat drill orchestrator. Once a month, it runs a red team script across 2 paired facilities, spoofed identity, delayed paperwork, and a simulated power curtailment. The orchestrator measures time to detect, time to human, and time to recover, then writes the results to the same risk register. No drama, just drills. Human impact is still the only score that matters. A nurse at a border clinic wants to confirm a patient's eligibility for a subsidized visit without exposing more data than necessary. She taps the agent, it references the program text, shows the minimum proof needed, and returns a yes/no with a short explanation in Spanish and English. If the grid is unstable, it still returns a conservative yes/no from the rules path, then syncs later. The nurse never has to parse a control clause. She sees a clear decision, a short citation, and a log that protects her when questions come. I test a contrarian line. Security drills and control mapping slow product market fit. The record suggests the opposite. When the agent is explicit about what it needs and why, pilots convert faster because operators know what to expect in an audit. The artifact test is straightforward. Compare onboarding completion rates and incident call volume before and after we shipped machine-readable control references and signed incident logs. In our own telemetry, support tickets dropped when explanations got shorter and more specific. Simplicity wins, specificity builds trust. There are options. 2 are off the table. We cannot outsource corridor trust to a marketing page that says, "We care about security." We also cannot paralyze the roadmap waiting for a perfect unified binational framework. The real decision is between shipping a minimal auditable core that maps to existing artifacts and chasing features that cannot be defended under investigation. We choose the core. We keep the surface small. We build the habit of proof. Synthesis. The series argued that distribution, identity, and payments, and energy-aware compute set the contour of what is possible. The present balance permits agents that read rules, cite pages, degrade gracefully under curtailment, and keep humans informed. It forbids monolithic, opaque stacks that couple identity, money, planning, and messaging in a way that fails together. It leaves uncertain how fast corridor governance can standardize incident reporting and fee rail catalogs. That uncertainty is manageable if we anchor to existing artifacts and design for change. 2 near-term moves. First, for corridor operators, stand up a joint corridor status and incident exchange with stable IDs, signed updates, and a public history by the end of the next quarter. Instrument. A shared API with a lightweight schema. Incident type, facilities affected, control categories triggered, recovery action taken, and closure time. This immediately reduces rumor loops and lets planners adjust in hours, not weeks. Second, for product teams shipping agents into factories and clinics, freeze the auditable core in the next 2 sprints. Document parsers that default to rules, a signed document pipeline, and a risk register with control references. Instrument an internal change freeze on these layers and a public note in the release log. This improves trust without slowing iteration on UX and retrieval. One long-term guardrail, establish a corridor governance compact that sets minimums for energy signal exposure, incident transparency, and document standardization, with an annual public drill and a cross-review. Instrument, a memorandum referencing the program manuals, the cybersecurity framework functions, and the incident reporting timelines, plus a simple scorecard published every year. It is not a treaty, it is a habit of proof the corridor can live with. Bottom line, security strains, governance friction, and product fit are not separate problems. They are one deployment problem, making the safe path the fast path and proving it. Execution dominance now means faster drills, smaller tails during stress, and logs that stand up to auditors. We ship the core, drill monthly, and keep the interface boring. Thank you for staying patient and exacting. We keep shipping safely and keep listening.